We are so excited to see you here today. Thank you for coming back if you were here for the earlier panel. This is our second panel of the afternoon. I want to start by just introducing the second panel. The title of our panel is actually Supporting Somali Communities Through Education and the Arts, Perspectives on K-12 and Higher Education Experiences. And my name is Terri Rodriquez. I'm an Associate Professor of Education here at St. Ben's and St. John's. On our panel, we also have Nihat Polat from Duquesne University. Then we will hear from Thoma, who teaches at Apollo High School. We have Kirstin Bratt from St. Cloud State University. And our own Susan Cogdill, women's choir and education here at St. Ben's and St. John's. Okay. So we are so excited to be here today and really to be part of the relationships that are being built with our communities. So as you know, Nihat and I and Laura co-authored Supporting Muslim Students, a guide to understanding the diverse issues of today's classrooms, and it was just published in May of this year by Rowman and Littlefield. In the book, we talk about how Muslim students experience school in a post-9/11 world. We share some basic information about Islam and how faith beliefs and practices might intersect with school practices. Our talk today will focus on how you might use our book as a resource in implementing an anti-bias literacy curriculum. So to illustrate what we mean by that, what is an anti-bias literacy curriculum? We're going to dive right in with a critical literacy activity that we might use in our classrooms. I'm going to show you some texts and some images about Islam and about Muslim people. We'll talk about how the texts and images make you feel and what messages you think that they are conveying. We'll compare the different messages, okay, and then afterwards we'll talk about how they're different. Do any of you remember this billboard? Anyone remember it? This was put up, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I actually took the picture of the billboard. It was up on I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Cloud. A friend of mine who commutes from St. Michael to St. Ben's every day said she also remembers that when the billboard was first put up, there were no words. It was just the image of the eyes with the suggestion of a burqa. A few weeks later, the words appeared. We think that this was a purposeful part of the message it's intended to convey. So we'd like you to take a few minutes and just look at it, and then turn and talk to someone close to you, and I'll ask a few people to share. How does this image make you feel? These words, how do they make you feel? What message is it trying to convey? So take a minute and just turn and talk to the people around you. Okay, I'm going to have you finish your last sentence. All right. Can we bring it back to the larger group now? Would 1 or 2 people like to share what you talked about with your partner? Yes.
I remember seeing this billboard actually, and I just remember being really confused when I saw it. I was going to Target that day, and I just was like very surprised that this was kind of in my community. And we also were just kind of talking about like the extreme patriotism that you see within that billboard. It doesn't, as far as we the message to us that was conveyed. It wasn't like, should we fear it? It was like, you should fear truth.
Good. Okay.
All right, so she talked about confusion. She said she was surprised to see this come up in her community. She thought it felt like it was giving a hyper-patriotic message. And was there anything after that?
Oh, and then it was just kind of the message of, rather than a question, it felt more like a statement, like, you should fear this.
Yeah, it didn't sound like a question to her. It sounded like a statement. Here's something you should be afraid of. So the word fear, it's on the billboard, and it's part of the bigger message. Does anyone else see anything else? Yes?
I keep saying the rear view mirror without the words.
Yeah, some people, when they look at it, they think it looks like you're just looking at your rear view mirror, like there's someone in your back seat. And that's like really creepy, right? Good. Okay. So I think you know that this billboard is typical of a kind of rhetoric that's been pervasive in the US since 9/11, and it creates and feeds what we call Islamophobia. Islamophobia is an irrational fear of, aversion, or discrimination against Islam or people who practice Islam. So now look at the image of a Muslim father and a daughter represented in this picture book. Yo soy Muslim. It means I am Muslim. It's written by Mark Gonzalez and illustrated by Meredith Damini. It's one of the books in a new imprint created in 2016 by publisher Simon & Schuster called Salam Reads. I'm going to read just a few pages out loud, but I want you to compare it to the image I just showed you and think about how this book makes you feel. But also think about, how do you think a Muslim child might feel seeing the billboard and then seeing this text being read aloud to them in a classroom? Yo soy Muslim. It has been said, if you climb a tree to the very top and laugh, your smile will touch the sky. If you stay there overnight, you will learn to count stars like dreams. Inside cities where skyscrapers cloud the view of everything above, walk in the steel and shadows, remembering Mayan pyramids that too lived amongst the heavens. There are questions we all ask when we're learning what it means to be human. Who invented my hands? Why wasn't I born with wings? And does the moon ever get lonely? There are questions this world will ask. What are you? And where are you from? And there will come a day when some people in the world will not smile at you. On that day, tell them this: Yo soy Muslim. I am from Allah and angels and a place almost as old as time. I speak Spanish, Arabic, and dreams. Say it with me. Yo soy Muslim. Our prayers were here before any borders were. In our classrooms, we might ask students, how did these images in this poem make you think? How did they make you feel? How is this message different from that of the billboard? And we would talk about the way that this text invites us in with a language of love and wonder, how it warms us with beautiful colors and images, and how it opens our thinking about what it means to be human and about what we all share. This text fosters empathy and compassion rather than inciting fear and suspicion. So laying these two texts, the billboard and the picture book, side by side, offers polar perspectives that can be unpacked, challenged, and questioned through carefully facilitated and thoughtful discussions. And we think that supporting such discussions is an essential part of an anti-bias teaching and a skill that everyone can develop.
So earlier we said that in our talk we'll focus on how educators can use our book as a guide and resource. So I'd like to clarify that this is not supposed to be a to-do list for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of recipe to fix a problem. So basically, we're hoping that the book will help you understand your own personal beliefs about Muslim communities and Islam, and use that information as tools for strengthening an anti-bias curriculum and resources for educating yourself on the things that you are about, you're not sure about in terms of how the education of Muslim students should be in our school systems.
So in orienting you toward the book as a resource for social justice teaching, we're organizing the rest of the panel around 5 key ideas. They're going to be represented on the slides on the left-hand side. So starting from the very top is a circle and it's kind of blue. And that represents tell your own story first. Know who you are. Know how your experiences and beliefs intersect in your teaching. This is really important because without understanding our own experiences and backgrounds, our cultures, our frame of reference, we can't see how our biases affect others or how they would inform our teaching. The second is the yellow background with the ear. Listen to who your students are. Educate yourself about the context of their lives. This is important, especially for teachers, because sometimes we're afraid to make ourselves vulnerable or to admit what we don't know. In fact, sometimes we don't even know what we don't know, okay? The third one, the scales with the brown background, is to become an equity advocate for your students and their families. Be politically conscious. Be socially aware. Ask, how are these students' strengths being recognized and their needs being supported? This is especially important for Muslim students who need social, emotional, and academic support as they strive to develop positive self-identities in post-9/11 America. Number 4, the blue background with the books. Harness the tools to build, fortify, and sustain an anti-bias curriculum in your classroom, your school, and your community. As I think you would all agree, such pedagogies are increasingly important in our current political climate. And number 5, the orange background, recommit yourself. Accept only the highest levels of access and achievement for every student, but especially those from marginalized groups. This is why you're here. Embrace the opportunities, the resources, the connections, the relationships you're building here and across your work.
So our first takeaway message is to remind you that as our work as social advocates, advocates for social justice and equity for all students, just like our previous panelist, Terri, when she was talking about her book, as a principal, how she came about to write this book, we all have our own stories. So I ask you, what is your story? How do you come to perceive these education system and how we can support diverse populations? Well, mine was, I grew up in a rural area in Turkey, and my wife grew up in Pittsburgh in a rural area in America, part of Charleroi and Bell Vernon areas of Pittsburgh. So we have our own story. Our son, a Muslim multi-ethnic kid in a Pittsburgh public school, one day on the way home, he told us in the car that one of his friends asked if he's a terrorist. And he was so casual in telling us the story, and he actually said, my best friend John, I'm just using a pseudonym, told me if I was a terrorist. And then the kids follow up with a question, asked if his father, implying me, was a member of ISIS. So of course we contacted the school. The teacher was wonderful, and we got to the bottom, and we met the parents, also wonderful people. But the school had some issues in terms of resources and having policies in places when things like this happen.
So my story begins here in central Minnesota. My identity aligns with a majority of US teachers. I'm white, I'm English speaking, I'm Christian, and I'm female. I grew up in a suburban community. I'm the granddaughter of farmers and a first-generation college student. I would describe my parents and my upbringing as religiously conservative. I was raised with evangelical Lutheran faith beliefs and practices. You are probably aware that St. Cloud has been referred to as White Cloud for its lack of racial diversity. So when I returned to live here several years ago, I was struck by how much things had changed, yet also how much they had stayed the same. I didn't know that when I came home, I would write a book about supporting Muslim students. In fact, when I first met Nihat in 2009, he asked me why, as it seemed to him, multicultural educators avoided talking about religious diversity. I was really surprised by his question, and I pretty quickly said, oh, that's because in the US we have freedom of religion. We have separation of church and state. So it isn't something that public schools need to, quote, worry about. I kind of laugh at my simple answer now, and especially in light of current contexts, see how simple that really was. So in a moment, Nihat's going to talk about the legal implications of advocating for religious minority students. But before he does that, I want to remind us of our context, our story here in St. Cloud, where we are witnessing how a growing population of Somali Muslim families are being welcomed by many, yet spurned by some. These are just a few of the recent headlines in our newspaper, and they testify to the tensions and the challenges between families, students, and schools. So the next key takeaway, the ear on the yellow background, is to listen to your students' stories. So knowing your own story is important, but then educating yourself about who your students are. Coming to a conference like this to understand more about the Somali Muslim community is really important. So in a little bit, you're going to hear some more about who our Somali Muslim students are. We're going to hear about students at Apollo High School and students at St. Cloud State University from Lauren and Kirstin who work with them.
All right, so in our book, we highlight a few concepts that are commonly used in cultural studies. And one of those concepts is, for example, cultural essentialism, which claims that, in essence, people who belong to one culture are all the same. And another term that is commonly used is cultural determinism, which implies your culture determines who you become. And there are, different theoretical frameworks you can use from Bakhtin to Vygotsky's work, but we don't have time to get in those. Another term that we align with and we build our theory, the conceptual framework for our book is culturally responsive pedagogy, is cultural relativity. So basically, anytime you always put yourself and your culture at the center and define everything else in opposition to your systems. And cultural relativity implies that no culture is superior to the others and everything is relative to how you center yourself. Cultural responsive pedagogy is based on Geneva Gay or Gloria Ladson-Billing's work on helping African American kids primarily. As you know, we have a huge achievement gap in our country. And so we use the same pedagogical framework in our book to facilitate the education of not only Muslim kids, all diverse kids. So this pedagogy is basically based on additive bilingualism. So you help kids, rather than take away from what they have, subtractive bilingualism, we connect with kids and we build on their strengths and help them relate to the curriculum and instruction so they learn better. So far we've discussed the importance of knowing your own story first and then educating yourself about your students and then the context of the lives of your students. The third idea we hope you will remember from this talk is continuous reminder to advocate for the equity of all students, especially those marginalized populations. And I personally love statistics. When you look at national statistics, some of them scare us. As you probably know, for example, bullying is one of the big issues we have in our school systems. And I think our national average is around 22% of our students have reported to be being bullied one way or another. And this number is actually around 50% for Muslim students, is more than twice the national average. And it's, for example, for girls who wear hijab, it's almost 1 in 5 girls who wear hijab have been subjected to some form of bullying. And even worse is around 10% of those are actually physical. And that is something the school systems have to take action about. So I don't know, some educators may not know. Actually, a lot of teachers I have talked to don't really know about this, but there are federal laws about this too. So you can see on the slide title 4, 6, and 9, they all prohibit discrimination on basis of religion, color, ethnicity, gender, etc. And on the next slide, I will show you what happens when school systems enact or implement policies that are inconsistent with federal laws. For example, in 2004, there was a case in Oklahoma where a sixth grade girl was dismissed because of wearing hijab. That's the school perceived to be against the no hat policy. So, the parents went to the court and DOJ had to step in, and then that no hat policy was found to be against the 14th Amendment that allows people to practice their religion.
So our fourth takeaway message is around the question, okay, how do I build this anti-bias curriculum? So we have some resources. The book has lots more, but a couple I want to point out. The first one is called ING, the Islamic Networks Group. And what they do is, it's a nonprofit organization, and their mission is to counter prejudice and discrimination against American Muslims. They engage the community through education and building relationships. So they use regional volunteers at a grassroots level. They deliver presentations, training seminars, workshops, and panel discussions. And I think it's really important that ING teaches about Islam in the context of religious pluralism. And we really think their emphasis on building relationships is extremely important. Another resource is the Salam Reads imprint that I told you about. Here are some other titles that will be coming out soon. Salam comes from the Arabic word for peace. This imprint plans to publish picture books, chapter books, young adult literature for students in middle and secondary grades. And of course, there are some excellent resources for locating high-quality children's books by, about, and for Somali youth. The Somali Literacy Project aims to connect Somali families with educators and other community members to provide information about early literacy, early language, and education. Then there's Somali's Kids Books. This is a resource for Somali parents and children to enjoy and purchase bilingual books, music, and videos. And then finally, I included a cover picture of Mary Hoffman's critically acclaimed picture book, The Color of Home, published in 2002. These are just a few resources, and as you know, there is a need for more, but the list of culturally responsive titles is growing. Here's one other resource. The Minnesota Humanities Center collaborated with the Somali community to launch the Somali Bilingual Book Project. And since 2006, 4 traditional Somali folktales have been published in both English and Somali. So we're very encouraged by the increasing availability of resources like this. So next, we want you to hear from Lauren, who will talk to us about her students at Apollo.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and as you can see, this was designed to be done with my coworker Farhiya. She is a paraprofessional who's worked with me for the last several years, and unfortunately, she was not able to make it today. And I really, really do mean unfortunately, because I'm kind of uncomfortable telling you who are my students, right? I spend 8-9 hours every day with them, so I know them as students, but I'm not them. My students know that I really like tea, and Somalis make really excellent tea. And so frequently they bring me mugs of tea, like as a bribe or as a gift. And every time I ask them, how do you make this tea? And they say, Miss Thoma, this is so silly. Put your tea in your mug, put hot water on it. Beautiful. And it's not anything like how I've ever made tea. It's spicy and it's sweet and it's creamy. And it's taken me a couple years to kind of realize, even if I had that recipe, even if they had a written recipe, or even if they had measurements that I have in my kitchen, which of course they don't, even if I did, I would be making white central Minnesotan tea. I cannot make Somali tea because I'm not Somali. And I really wish that Farhiya was here to represent my students as well, and I wish my students were here to represent themselves. Everything I tell you, please take with a grain of salt, because it's coming through my perspective as their teacher, and I am white, and I am a native English speaker, and that does distance us. As much as I value Somali tea, as much as I care about it, as much as I appreciate its cultural relevance and its history, just like I do my students, there's still a gap, okay? So, Farhiya is my paraprofessional, has worked with me for the last several years. I am a teacher of new to country students at Apollo High School here in St. Cloud. For those of you who aren't from the area, we have 4 high schools in St. Cloud. One is a private Catholic school. There are 2 public high schools. Tech is the school on the south side, and I'm on the north side at Apollo. And then we also have an alternative learning center. When I was a student here, I had my student teaching at Apollo High School. Before I had gone into the building, I did a quick search of what is Apollo? Where am I teaching? What are my students? And these are, among many, 4 facts that I had found. When this was the first thing that affronted me, I was pretty scared. Right? I was a student at St. Ben's, and I was a student at Annandale High School, which is very, very white. There were 1 EL student in the entire high school. And when I saw that the majority race is actually the minority in this school, when I saw that more than a quarter of the students don't speak English as their first language, when I saw that 60% or nearly 60% are free or reduced lunch, that means they are living in some form of poverty, and that a whole percent of our students are homeless, I was terrified. And then I went and I met the students, and my new to country students have given me an entirely different perspective on these numbers. Because when my students, many of whom come from refugee camps, when they are there, they're hearing of the land of milk and honey, and prosperity, and peace, and joy, and they find everything here. They really do. They truly believe that this school is the land of milk and honey, of peace and joy and prosperity, and they are more than happy to join me in my classroom, and it's a beautiful thing. You might see me shaking. I'm a little nervous of you all, but mostly I'm passionate about my students, like fiercely passionate about them, and sometimes that gets me a little hyped up. So when I started at Apollo High School in the 2013-2014 school year, there were 4 EL teachers, and there were 2 Somali cultural liaisons, and I thought that was pretty impressive. The cultural liaison's job was to translate at a minimum, right? But they're doing a lot of other rich things, connecting students with needs, connecting teachers with other teachers, connecting everyone with resources. They're really, really wonderful help to us all. But now, in this school year that we're just starting, there are 9 of us EL teachers. There are still 2 cultural liaisons who are Somali, but now there's also multiple paraprofessionals. And those people are really wonderful and valuable because my job is to write lessons for my students, but lessons is the noun here and students get the noun, right? The paraprofessional works with the students. They're not worried about paperwork, they're not worried about politics, they're there working one-on-one with those students. And so it's really, really wonderful to have that teamwork in our classrooms and to see that growing more and more at Apollo. We also now have a Somali assistant principal. The last couple of years he's been around as our intern principal, and he's wonderful, and this year he's officially our assistant principal. However, I was just talking to one of my students the other day, and at our beginning of the year assembly, he introduced himself as our principal. And she came into my class and said, "Miss Thoma, for the last 2 years, I thought he was a student." Okay, so, and she's Somali, and so she had this kind of perception of, yeah, he's a great guy, he's a great asset, he's a mutual person to me, but she didn't see him as a principal until he was formally introduced as such, even though he's been filling the role for the last several years. Oh, wait, I think that something important about this is that, yes, our numbers have grown significantly, and that's why you see such a large jump in the number of our teachers, but it's also grown in a certain way that is asking us to have some smaller class sizes. So students with some different needs, that having 35, 40 students in a class is just not working. And so then they're able to hire some more teachers, also because some laws have been changing that's giving us some different funding. I'll kind of get into that later. But I think the important takeaway is that this is part of the big picture of what our students are fitting into. My students are level 1 English language proficiency. So level 1 is anything ranging from, I can't say anything to you in this language, I cannot write anything for you in this language. If you're speaking to me or putting something in front of me to read, I have no hope. Picture taking me and dropping me in Saudi Arabia, right? Like I don't even know what Arabic symbols look like. I'm stuck. It can even push into maybe some simple sentences, like I like chocolate, I like coffee, I like blah. But that's kind of it, that's the limit. This is students collecting vocabulary. Those are my kiddos. And I want to be clear, that does not mean that it is a Somali class. There are some people who think I teach Somali students. Many of my students are Somali. I've also had students from all over the world. The huge majority of them are Somali. But it is important to know that I'm not segregating my students based off of their ethnicity or their background. It's based on test scores, basically. Speaking of those test scores, this is our scores for Minnesota, St. Cloud, and Apollo. Minnesota's on this side, Apollo's on this side, St. Cloud schools as a district is in the middle. This is a test that only ELs take. It's a nationwide standard test, but it's something each state opts into. It is a consortium. WIDA is the consortium. So Minnesota does opt into this as standards for our EL students. I think there's lots to be learned from this. Perhaps one of the more important things is to notice those lower levels. Statewide, there's about 30% of the students who are level 1, level 2. Now, I explained level 1, level 2 is kind of pushing maybe into some basic paragraphs, maybe. Independently reading some like maybe 3rd grade level texts. At Apollo, more than half of our ELs are level 1 and level 2. I think that kind of goes together with the concept of how many new teachers we've brought in the last couple of years because our population is growing significantly. The fact that those students are level 1, level 2 is telling me a couple things. One is that they're coming with limited or no English education previous to being here. And maybe the other is that they're just new. They just haven't had all that much time here. And I think that kind of gives you a picture of who my students are. Right? These are all kind of big landforms that shape who my class is as a whole, not any individual student. This is a new acronym, SLIFE, that has been one of those laws that's brought in new money to support our students in our schools. It is a 2016 statute in Minnesota, so it is still kind of in the works. Sometimes schools work a little slowly. It's a big ship to turn. SLIFE is the acronym that stands for Students with Limited or Interrupted Formal Education. And I always think of it that SLIFE are English learners, but an English learner isn't necessarily SLIFE. It's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square kind of thing. My students, many of them are SLIFE. And it's kind of a strange concept. But to me, it's the difference of if you dropped me in Saudi Arabia and you said, write your name, I would be able to write my name in English. I would be confused about how to write it in Arabic, but I would still kind of have the concept of that these symbols on the page have a letter name and a letter sound, and that phonics builds into language that has a meaning. And of course, my students, these SLIFE students, know about language. They're very oral culture, but they may not know how to read or write even in their first language. It's becoming more and more important to identify these SLIFE because they're attached to money now in our schools. And it's also important for their needs. I mean, that's kind of my main idea, that these students have exceptional and additional needs that we need to be knowledgeable about the student first in order to be aware of how to help them grow as students. In order to identify SLIFE, Minnesota has delineated 5 concepts that we're looking for in order to decide, is this an EL or is this a SLIFE who's also EL. For me, the most important, though, is that last bullet point, that a SLIFE may be pre-literate in their native language. The end of this, though, is that my most important walkaway is every student is unique. I can show you information about test scores. I can tell you statistics about my building as a whole or my classroom as a unit. But really, you would need to come and meet with each individual student in order to know who are my students. And unfortunately, they're not here, but fortunately, they are out in St. Cloud. And they would love to be part of this. I told some of them that I was here, and they were like scrambling to get here, and it's fine. Like, there's more opportunities for this because you're here, and this can be home for you. The last thing I'd like to leave you with, though, is one of those students' voices. And again, it's only one, but it's something at least. This is excerpts from a letter that she wrote me after parent-teacher conferences in the end of last school year. So her mother wasn't actually able to come to the parent-teacher conferences. Her mom works at night. So she came with her aunt and her neighbor, who has a driver's license, and her older sister, who had a little bit easier English to help translate. And the whole crowd comes into my classroom. Usually I need like a whole table for parent-teacher conferences with my students. And she was compelled to write me this letter to tell me about her experience at parent-teacher conference. And I thought it was really powerful that it was her self-propelled voice to tell me that parent-teacher conferences, she said, this night became the happiest night and my favorite night. And she said, it is my dream that I dream every day, every night, and every time to be educated person. And today you really felt me that I can be educated person. And she kind of closed with, you are the first teacher who made me proud of myself. The secret here is that I am her only teacher. But the walk away here is that she is admiring her own strength to be here. She is admiring her community's concept of her. And even though we might look at those stats of what Apollo is and what our ELs are, we might say, you know, she made some grammar mistakes, right? But she chose to go out and make this risk in a letter, and in order to express that she's proud of who she is and who she's becoming and who she has been. I think that that's really the most important thing. I'm so sick of being at the dentist with my mouth full of tools, and they're asking me, what do you teach? And I have to think, should I say I teach English, or should I say I teach English as a second language? Because sometimes I'm so worn out of explaining to people, no, my students really are incredible people. Yeah, sometimes it's difficult. So is teaching anything, right? But I really, really think these students are what makes my job a lot easier. And I wish more people could understand that. So I'm glad you're here to hear me rant a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Bratt, who's at St. Cloud State University working with Muslim youth.
Hi, thank you. When Terri asked me to be here today, I thought, okay, yeah, 5 or 6 people will be interested in what we're talking about. I'm ashamed that I thought that, so I'm really grateful that you're all here. Thank you so much. I, like Terri and Lauren, I was raised, well, like Terri, right in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. And I don't know if we ever thought we would be here together in a panel at St. Ben's. It's great to be here. I taught, I guess it's my 25th year teaching in the university setting. And probably for my first 16 years, I thought I was pretty fair, equitable teacher. I did my best to listen to students, try to understand their cultural backgrounds, have that sort of sensitivity, relativity about culture. Then I spent some time in Morocco, and if you added it all up, I suppose I was there about a year. And I realized, again, another cultural immersion. I had a cultural immersion in Mexico as a much younger person. Through cultural immersion, learning how much I really don't know and could never hope to know. But what I'm so grateful I got to do that before taking the job at St. Cloud State University, where we have a lot of Muslim students, and I've been able to learn I have this Moroccan understanding, this immersion in Muslim faith and culture, to at least have a bridge toward understanding more about what my Somali students might need. And mostly just having an ability to ask better questions, I think. So what I'm going to present today is just some of my questions, some of the answers I've gathered, and if it's helpful to you, I'm really glad for that. I'll start out with a scene from Morocco. It's me with some friends. So my friends and I are walking down a village road, and ahead of us is an overpass, like a footbridge that's over the road. And I see it coming toward, I see us walking toward it, and then I could see in the distance under the bridge someone on a bicycle coming toward the bridge. Also, kind of like you do, you duck your head, even though you don't really need to. Ducking his head to go under the bridge, and then coming out of the bridge upright and just yelling at us, just like, I had no idea what it was. It's in Moroccan Arabic, and like, oh no, he's yelling at us. What is it? I was so nervous. And then my friends kind of yelled back at him, and then everybody just erupted in laughter. And I have no idea what's just happened. I assume that there's been an altercation, a fight, and then a humorous resolution to the fight. And that's not at all what it was. It was just that this man was saying, look, there's a footbridge, duck your heads. And that scene is in so many different ways repeated over and over again, day after day, in our conversations with people that we cannot fully understand or hear. And I just want to, maybe you have your own stories like that. Just complete misunderstandings that get resolved so easily if you're listening and thinking. And what Terri was saying about the way of just knowing who you are first, and then listening to what other people are saying about who they are, is so important. I want to talk a little bit just about some of the students that I've worked with. Warsan Shir is a poet. She was the youngest. She was the first young poet laureate of London. She is a woman who was born in Somalia and spent time in Kenya in the refugee camp, and is a poet that I recommend to anyone who's interested in learning more about Somali immigrants. She can put things into words that I don't think anyone else can manage from anywhere. She's beautiful, but she wrote this poem, "Give your daughters difficult names. Give your daughters names that command the full use of tongue. My name makes you want to tell me the truth. My name doesn't allow me to trust anyone that cannot pronounce it right." And I really spend a lot of time trying to pronounce names right. I find it really difficult. And I want to talk in a few minutes about some of the names, some of the nicknames that students have given themselves. But I think this is a good mirror with what all of you have been talking about so far, and that is, how do we get to know our students? How do we do it? And I know this is a slide with too many words on it, but Susan Lenski developed this predictability log, which is just a series of questions that it's good to know. It's good to know these things about your students. What do they think about? What do they care about? Who's with them? Who's not? Where have they been? Who are their friends? Who's their most important person? What do they care about? These types of questions that help us really understand who our students are. Our Muslim community has been celebrating a very, very important holiday, and Eid Mubarak to those of you that are celebrating. I asked my students a couple of weeks ago to just tell us about the holiday. And they told me I was the first person that had ever asked for that. And they thanked me and they brought me things, and they were so grateful that I had given them a chance to talk about Eid al-Adha in their class. And I thought, wow, I mean, I always feel so shy to ask people to talk about their holidays or their traditions or their religions. But it meant so much to them, so I'm always going to do it. But this Eid it's probably a story that might be familiar to you if you're Jewish or Christian. It's a story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son. And when he was willing to do it, God replaced the child with a sheep so that Abraham could sacrifice a sheep instead. And so you probably know this holiday. And I was told a story in Morocco about some British people that visited, they wanted to visit Morocco, and they happened to end up in Morocco on the day of the slaughtering of the sheep. And all they could see was men walking from house to house with butcher knives covered in blood, and they went straight back to the airport and went back to England because they were so scared. But it's a beautiful holiday, and it's celebrated on the lunar calendar, so it's not a day that you can put on your, like, to remember that it's always going to be a certain day, but it travels about 13 days forward every year, and just watch for it and ask people about it. One of my students last year, Halima Aiden, is one of these daughters with difficult name, Halima, that I didn't grow up with. Right? And she definitely stuck to that. I don't trust anyone that won't pronounce my name correctly. She was a very powerful woman. After the stabbing in the mall last year at Crossroads Mall, she became very active. She was, this is the march that we had at St. Cloud State University. And she kept talking about what could she do, what could she do. She wanted to help her community. She wanted to do something. And then she, from my perspective, disappeared. And next time I saw her, she was in the Miss Minnesota pageant. And then she ended up on the cover of Allure and Vogue. And she's become a really big star now in the fashion world. And she's talked about, sorry, I may have lost the slide, but it may come back. Oh, no, she talked about meeting Iman, this model that sort of a famous Somali woman. And she got a chance to talk with her, and she said, I asked Iman, how is it dealing with people who are in your own community and who don't understand? She said, you're bound to have critics no matter what you do in life, so you just have to choose. Do I like what I'm doing enough to ignore the people who are hating on me? Halima had a hard time with becoming a Miss Minnesota contestant. It wasn't something that was encouraged in her family. She wasn't raised as a pageant girl. Her mother was very nervous and skeptical, did not want to go to the pageant, did not want her to wear anything tight-fitting. And Halima kept working on her presentation to make sure that her mother would be satisfied with it, but also that she could compete. And so she ended up adding some layers of fabric to her. She was fully clothed for the swimsuit competition, but she ended up even adding a few layers just to make sure her mother would be okay with what she was doing. She has said, don't change to suit the industry, but make the industry come to you. And she's been modeling only in hijab. So I want to talk a little bit about the names, the nicknames that my male students tell me. They always say, call me Abdi. And I've heard too many Moroccan parents fighting with their sons about that nickname to be able to do that. I will not do that. So what I do instead is I ask the young men, I'll call you Abdi if your parents think it's okay. And they usually will say, no, then call me Abdi Malik, which is my name. I would just like to encourage you to really interrogate that nickname and consider not ever using it. Most parents who name their children Abdi Malik or Abdul Aziz or Abdullah really want that full name to be used. And I think it's really important that we do that. And if you want to think back to the poem, yeah, maybe it's a difficult name for you, but it's worth pronouncing in full. This is a chart of all the names of God in the Abdul Malik, Abdul Aziz, all those names are, and you can help me, Nihat, with this, but these are all names that are meaning that the attributes of God. And so leaving the attribute away from the name is like stripping it in half to me and leaving nothing. So here's an English version of some of the names of God. I'm particularly moved by Islam. Its 5 pillars to me are in a way perfect. If you're looking for even a secular way to live, if you're looking for a way to be at one with yourself and creation, I am very moved by the way that Islam is articulated. And so, you know, the idea of professing your own faith, whatever it is, of being in meditation and prayer, of giving charity, of fasting, of pilgrimage. I think anyone can adapt these pillars to their own practice, and I have myself, and I'm very moved by those. So I'm always curious and asking students to talk to me about their Islamic faith. I was gonna just maybe read a little bit. I wrote 2 books. Well, I wrote one and I edited one through my research grants and time in Morocco, and I thought maybe I'd just read a passage to you before I close. So in this passage, it just really describes kind of life, family life in Morocco. And it's about a man he's taken his family home to see his parents. And he's worried about his parents. He says, anxious thoughts toss and turn him through the night and keep him from sleeping. He looks around the room at all the people he loves, all sleeping together along the cushions that line the walls of the room. Here they are, all together, not like in New York where each child sleeps alone in a big bedroom, but all in one room, breathing in unison. He wonders if they are dreaming the same dreams as they lie, head to head and toe to toe, around the room together. Once at home in New York, he heard his son describing these sleeping arrangements to his friends. He hears one boy say that it sounds exactly like camping in the Adirondacks. And the comparison upsets Adele, who has never been camping and who desperately wants to go. It's not the same at all, he almost shouts at his friend. And Adele's big sister, Salma, rushes to his rescue. Daoud remembers listening as Selma describes her grandmother's home with great tenderness to her brother's young friends. And Daoud realizes then how the children look forward to their visits. Not just to see people and places, but to be close to their parents and relatives, to breathe together and even dream the same dreams. I was really encouraged in August when our president at St. Cloud State offered the idea that we need to do better for our students of color in central Minnesota. He declared a strong commitment to that goal, and he brought up the fact that if we have in Minnesota the goal of having 70% of our high school students complete higher education, we are far short of that, but it's so much worse for our students of color. And he had spoken to us at length about how we're going to commit our university's resources and time to closing that achievement gap. And I'm just grateful to work there, to work here in central Minnesota, to be here with all of you, and to be committed to that work. And I'm hoping we can achieve that together. Thank you. Okay, we're going to do a little turn and talk. Oh, when I started my talk, I was talking about how we can get to know our Muslim students. What I was wondering, along with this turn and talk, we want you to turn to a neighbor and introduce yourselves, share an insight from the conference, something you've learned. And I'm also curious, if you don't mind, what did teachers get to know about you? How did you know when your teachers cared about you? So if you don't mind, just spend a few minutes talking to your neighbors about these questions.
Would you join me? Stand, shall we? Yeah. It's been a little bit of time sitting. My name is Susan Cogdill, and I would just like to invite us to engage in a different activity, making sense of all that we've heard from all these amazing speakers. It's a lot to take in, especially on a Tuesday afternoon, week 3. Good job, everyone. So this is my first peace conference. I'm so excited because I really am so grateful to be able to work here at a place that welcomes these conversations. Because really what we do at St. Ben's and St. John's is that we grow minds for future. And so thank you all for being here. And thank you for all of those people who played a part in creating this conversation that's really, really important, especially for education, you know? Yeah, because our job as educators is to make sure all of our students feel welcome. And how do we feel welcome if we're new to the conversation, new to all these things that are that we're thinking about right now? So I'm just gonna lead us in an exercise that, I don't know, maybe connects us with each other, with our humanness, something that goes really deep into our pasts and our future, and it grounds us in the earth, and it grounds us in humanity. And it's called chant. And so, if you would just make some noise for me, go, wah, ah, ah, oh. Yeah, it's just, we respond. There's just something about voice that we respond to in a really powerful way. So I would like to just share with you, as I participated in a workshop last spring where it was a song a singing experience where people were coming together just to get connected with different people they'd never met. And I would love to have you guys participate in this song because it really transformed my experience of being part of, and I sound hokey, but part of the earth. Because I grew up in Wyoming, the state. My grandparents were ranchers and farmers, and I lived in a coal mining town. And I just, like the earth, like my experience moving to Minnesota has been new too. And so I'm just taking all in these things that make us, residents of the earth in Minnesota. And beyond. How do we welcome the globe? It would have been one of the conversations we had over coffee of how do we welcome people from the globe? Because like Wyoming is square, the state structure, so so just different. But to something that connects us is our voices, right? And chant is a very powerful way of connecting to this, which I'd like to read from you. From the mind is mightier than the sword, enlightening the mind, opening the heart, and the chant is the music of the cosmic spheres and the natural expression of higher consciousness. Chant is not an obscure ritual. It is the important tool used by people everywhere to heal their bodies, quiet their minds, and bring the sacred into their lives. Chant unifies, it brings people together in thought, intention, knowledge, and love. And so I'm going to welcome you to just make that sound again. Breathe when you need to, and just keep that sound going. Does your body feel differently? Does your body feel differently standing next to someone else and feeling their voice next to you and that energy that's in the room that I need to hear spinning? This is a chant called the Contemplation Chant. And what it does is it weaves together all the great religions that we have, all the great religious traditions, the chants of different religions and different traditions. And so just invite you to participate and try it on, okay? And then we'll make you move and invite you to listen, as Kirstin talked about, like really intentionally listening. If we're trying to understand someone that grew up differently or speaks a different language, the first thing we need to do is because when we talk about all those things, that your students want to know, that you want to know about your students, we have to receive, right? So whether you want to listen, if you want to participate, or just like, imagine that you're in a bath, soaking all this sound in. I'm just going to invite you to move your body however you want and repeat after me. We're going to chant, so it's going to be over and over and over and over and over. Yeah? Yeah? Try it on. Here we go. And me first. Om Mane Padme Om. Om Mane Padme Om. Om Mane Padme Om. Om Mane Padme Om. This is for my percussionist. Yeah, Om Mane Padme Om. Awesome. So that means, that is from the Buddhist chant, I salute the jewel in the lotus. That's what that means. Yeah? So the next one I'd like to teach you is from Islam. La ilaha illallah. 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 There is no God but God. Yeah? So then we have the Hindu, Hebrew, Jewish, Shalom, Shanti, both peace and greetings, yeah? Would you try that one on? And Shalom, Shanti, Shalom, Shanti, Shalom, Shanti, Shalom. And when you say that, you can like smile because it's a greeting, right? Are you smiling? Turn the person next to you and smile at them, yeah? Uh-huh. Shanti. Yes, peace and greeting. Now this next one is something that you need to know that's been running through my mind since yesterday. Lo, you know what? Yeah, sing it with me. Ready? And Lo, Gloria. That one doesn't stop. It just keeps going. It never ends. Yeah. So it's an experience of really being present to chants that have been in existence for thousands of years. And somewhere on the planet, that chant is being sung. And what if we just listened to that beat? Like that just makes me weep when I think about that. I know one of them really, really well. And one of my best friends in the world, she knows another part really well. And our friendship is wonderful and pure. And I have so much to learn about the world. Yeah? So try something on. Try something on and just feel how they connect. Yeah? So I'm going to invite you to sing one of those parts and walk around the room. And sing while you're walking and just listen. Like, what is your part you're trying on? And again, and just bring that really sacred intention, recognizing that that chant for people in the world is very, very sacred. Yeah? And if you decide, gosh, I think I want to try a different one on, please do. Try something else on. Or if you just want to walk around going, wow. Like, what happens when I shut up and listen to humanity? Yeah? So I'm going to give you 12 seconds to spread out somewhere. 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. And I will reteach them all so you don't have to worry, okay? And eyes here if you are ready. So you're just gonna walk around and smiling. There's no order. You might like, or you might, there's no order. There's just being. But just listen, okay? So Isaac, where are you at, my friend? Thank you, Isaac. Isaac is our heartbeat. If we could all just connect to our Mother Earth heartbeat, yeah? So he's gonna start the And if we could put that in our feet. I'm gonna introduce them, and if that's the one you wanna try on, continue singing. Once we get them all together, then I'm gonna say walk, okay? Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. I can't hear you, come on, sing, yeah. Om Mani Padme Hum, La ilaha illallahu, La ilaha illallahu, La ilaha illallah. Louder on that one, La ilaha illallah. Shalom, Shanti, Shalom, Shanti, Shalom, Shanti, Now travel around the world and Smile. Acknowledge the human being in front of you. Fill the room with your sound. Send this attention to St. Cloud. What if we all could feel this? Amazing humanity. If you want to try a different chant on, you can switch. If you notice, your skin might be singing.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone. So we know that this last key takeaway message is why you're here. Alongside critical self-analysis, self-education, advocacy work, and anti-bias curriculum building, we do things like attend this conference. We have what we call mountaintop experiences with like-minded colleagues and friends and neighbors. We recommit ourselves to the highest expectations for ourselves and for those around us. As Mark Gonzalez reminds us, we are all learning what it means to be human. As social justice advocates, we take seriously the imperative to create and foster a better and more compassionate sense of this shared humanity. So we have a couple of minutes for questions for our panelists. So please let us know if you have a question, raise your hand. Does this work? Yay. Okay, where's the question?
like to thank you for the wonderful, wonderful panel.
Thank you. I have really good wait time.
Hi, so I have a question for Professor Thoma. I was just kind of wondering what would be, like, how do you communicate with your students that are like that level 1 of EL where they won't understand anything that you're saying to them? How do you begin that communication?
First, I turn on my microphone. Is it? I have a teacher voice, so I can do that too. Yeah. First of all, I feign like they can understand me. So this year I have a handful of Spanish speakers in my room. Literally every day, you guys, they come and say, Miss Thoma, no English. And I say, it's okay, come and sit down. And every day they're like, what is this crazy lady doing? She keeps speaking English to us. They're so frustrated with me. But they pick it up. And so then I supplement my English with lots and lots of visuals and lots of behaviors, mannerisms as I'm speaking. And then they pick up cues from each other and they piece it together quite well. Yeah, they work really hard to figure that out. Absolutely.
Thank you. I think we had another question over here.
The poem that was shared about choosing difficult names. I struggle when I don't have an ear for hearing and pronouncing. However, as I'm saying that, I just keep hearing try harder because I have so many students that I have the pleasure of working with that do not have American names, but they have chosen somewhere along the line to say, well, you can just call me Mark, you can just call me Sue, but that's not their name. But somewhere along the line, they have chosen that name, and I feel so mixed about it because, yeah, it is easier, and I will probably say it 20 times and not say it correctly, but from being here today, I can practice. And I guess if there's a question, is what has been your feedback from students who have either been given those names or chosen those names as a way to make it easier for us?
My students constantly try to make their names easier for me. And I think one lesson in persistence, because that's one thing we teach, is persistence, is I ask them, just please persist with me until I get it right, if you don't mind. I have Laichia, who has corrected me at least 30 times. And finally I said, where are you hearing it wrong? Like, because I couldn't hear the difference. So where is that moment, in your name where I'm getting it wrong? And so she gave it to me, and that's that first vowel, like, it's that little bit of a lift. And just her telling me that little clue, because she could say it over and over again, and she was getting frustrated about that, about me, and I was getting frustrated I couldn't get it. And I didn't want her to misinterpret my frustration as being with her name. And so I just asked her for that clue, like, just give me something where is it that I'm getting it wrong? And that after 30 times, now she finally has approved me. I'm not sure. I don't know if she's given up. I think I'm finally getting it right.
I'm just curious about from the student's perspective as well, though. How sometimes, it's okay. You can call me John. It's okay. And as I don't feel like I should be let off the hook. But on the other hand, I don't also want to make it into a
I would say, like, for me, yeah, I would say, are you giving up on me? It's still that same persistence question. Like, are you giving up on me? You don't think I can do it? I've noticed over the years more and more students going with their given names, with the names their parents call them, with me. And I'm really grateful for that. I feel like it's a small, maybe it's a small thing, but to me it's a huge thing that I get their names right, exactly right. I stand at the door. I see my students for 1 hour a day. I stand at the door and greet them by name on their way in and their way out. I say goodbye to each one by name. And that always comes up at the end of the semester as something they thank me for. And now third week, they actually won't leave the room until I'm at the door.
I think our panelists will be here for a few minutes, but I think is it 4 o'clock? Okay, so our time together is up, but panelists are here if you'd like to answer questions. We're going to be here for a little while. We're going to be in back signing books. Come get a book.